As people battle their addictions, it's really, they're battling themselves. They're battling all the false ideas that they've placed upon themselves as who they are. And when we take them into healing places, whether that be into a sweat lodge, into a talking circle, into a fasting, or if they go into dancing and they take up powwow dancing, or they go to one of our sacred lodges, or if they're in a sun dance or a rain dance, or attend those things, it's peeling those layers and ideas off of them so that it gets down to the real nut, you know, of who they are, the core of who they are. And they can build and build on that again in a good way, because it's like peeling layers off of something, saying this isn't, it's a false layer, that's not you. It's a false layer, it's not you. Then they build the layers that are really themselves, that they can take with them out there into the future, and they can be an inspiration to other people. Not because people want to be the same as them, but they want to be able to have joy in their heart and enjoy them and rejoice in their spirit being free when they get rid of their addictions. That's what you really find when you go through our ceremonies.
But I think it's about, well, humanity. That's it's um, what kind of society do you want to we want to create? You know, when I say we have to create humanity, then that also must say something. Well, there is a vision for humanity, that you know, how we fulfill our humanness. Um, I don't know if that's meant to benefit my own people so much as it's meant to benefit, you know, other people. I don't know. That's part of the sort of the question.
So, in terms of the rites of passage and this ceremony, this old ceremony to help little ones create those values, those morals, um, shape and mold their medicines, their skills, if you will, and to find out what instructions are they going to receive to help them conduct themselves accordingly in comparison to their roles, which in turn enhances one's community. And so the rites of passage, it's about prayer first and foremost. Um, Within those prayer, you'll find ceremonies such as the sweat lodge. You'll find ceremonies such as raising the pipes, as what we did, as I shared earlier. Tobacco offerings, we're constantly offering tobacco. Again, it's all about that exchange. Nothing in life is for free. So by offering that tobacco, it's from spirit to spirit. It's asking, what can I learn from you? What can I be committed to? And any knowledge that comes back to me, what are my responsibilities and accountabilities to that knowledge? And how do I begin to understand that knowledge to whereas I can turn around and give back after understanding that knowledge? The camping. Um, when we went out camping, what were the roles set out, and what did the men want to explore? And it was interesting how the camp unfolded. The men knew what they needed to do. They all split up, and some got harvested some wood. The others ended up erecting the teepee, and that we had out on camp, and the canvas tent. And so we had a nice prospector's tent that we were all sleeping in, and we ended up creating a kitchen. But first and foremost, before we erected those buildings and the teepee, we ended up offering that tobacco to the ground to which where we were going to camp. And the significance behind that is the idea that if we're coming to this area, we're going to be enhancing our positionality in terms of who we are as Indigenous people. And that comes with a process. So that process teaches us to offer that tobacco to where we are going to be learning. And so that camp is where was our classroom, if you will. And we offered that tobacco to our classroom. And we ended up smudging around the camp, where the camp was going to be. One of the men smudged those grounds in a good way. And so we're putting right off the bat, we're putting our intent in behind what we want what we want to learn, and how Mother Earth can teach us during that ceremony. And so the hunt itself, that was quite unique, and the men were excited about that. We didn't know exactly when we were going to harvest that moose, but we also knew, and we were being taught, there's a process in terms of approaching that four-legged moose. We weren't just going to go in there and start hunting and becoming haphazardly or haste in our ways. The rites of passage ceremony teaches us that there's a ceremony, there are processes and models in place that help guide us in terms of what's needed, what do we need to be mindful of, and understanding that one's journey from mind to heart is a long journey. So what's the space in between? What are the ethics? What is the ethical space in between us and Mooswa? And in between that space, we'll find a process and how we can further conduct ourselves as human beings. So following the ceremony of smudge, each morning we ended up smudging each morning and giving thanks to the fact that we were there, and always keeping that intent at the forefront of our minds and hearts and our spirits. The gun itself, that our designated hunter was holding for the team, he ended up smudging his gun. And so this is no different from what the old people did back in the day. They took that time to. Some would rub bear grease on their guns in preparation of the hunt. And so we ended up smudging our gun and asking for those prayers to allow the moose to find us, and not for us to find that moose. And that goes with the teaching that, you know, that medicine, if we're paying mind to our ways and being humble, if you will, and patient, then that medicine will find us. And so the Rites of Passage has a beautiful opportunity to share those processes and to guide us in that old way from the old people. And so our food, in terms of our food at the camp, we ended up smudging our food also before we all sat down in front of that fire. And there's a lot of jokes, there's a lot of storytelling, looking up in the stars and just hearing some different stories from the men. It was a good time to bond. Keep in mind, some of the men, they haven't come out of the city for a long time, so to go from the urban setting to a rural setting was a big transition, and many storytelling opportunities came while that fire was burning.
Indigenous knowledge has rooted deeply in many generations of experience in place, wherever that place is around the world. And in many ways, this is why I think indigenous knowledge derives its core understandings from what it considers to be earth knowledge, that the earth holds the knowledge, that the rocks hold the knowledge, the trees, and all of that stuff, because it has witnessed all of those generations. It's heard all of the speeches and songs and heard all of the ceremonies, so it captures the essence of what people in that place are trying to express, and then inspires people to express that. So it's a reciprocal relationship between the humans and the place. And after being I think by recognizing the contributions of the past, we get to appreciate the well from which that knowledge was generated. And so therefore we have to say, let's protect that well. Let's keep the ideas coming, so that we want a fluent generation of indigenous people, culturally fluent, linguistically fluent, socially fluent, because we're not done being human. And we can still use some good ideas. So I think that, and one reason, looking back, we'll say, to indigenous knowledge, there's an assumption there that there will be something from there we can harvest and bring forward to affect contemporary practice.
You men did the right thing today.
You said men.
Uh-huh. Used your mind and body to come up with the right decision. That's what men do. That was the last lesson you needed to learn.
Now, I guess it's on to the next step.
What next step?
Marriage. Come on, let's go find some wives.
Tanze, Kiskatelquasquamistu Snapion Nisikasan. My name is Black Buffalo Man. I come to you from Montreal Lake in Sturgeon Lake First Nation here in Saskatchewan. My current role here within this video, this virtual video, has been the coordinator for the macipiciw Men's Rites of Passage project that took place in Regina, Saskatchewan at All Nations Hope Network. So macipiciw translates into understand it's the act of hunting and or the act of moving camp. And so this community-based research project was about capturing aspects of the action itself, what's behind the action of what the men were coming to learn and what the men were teaching and what were the men being taught at the same time. And so, as you can see in the video, it also captures voices of Elder Betty McKenna and Willie Ermine and Reg Crowshoe and Rick Hill. So the idea was to help create those references, those citations, if you will, from a community perspective. And it was to capture the importance for the fact to show that this project only captures some of what the elders have already spoken about. And so in terms of how knowledge is created and how knowledge is gathered from a community perspective, it was enjoyable to hear those stories when we approached the old ones within the surrounding vicinity of Regina there. And so as coordinator, my hopes were to create the vision to help create the first what this project was going to look like. And again, the whole ceremony is about how we are able to learn from it. And so as the old one shared to us, first and foremost, nothing happens without tobacco. And so we were able to come into ceremony. We raised the Ospawagans, our ceremonial pipes, in following up the intent of what are we actually asking for? What are we actually willing to be committed to do to learn about this ceremony? And so with that being stated, we also took it to the Sweat Lodge and we offered flags to this ceremony and again to further ask those critical questions of what can this ceremony teach us, and in terms of what it means to be human, the greatest teaching one would ever receive. And so by gathering the grandfathers and grandmothers together, we're asking and the spirit helpers, we're asking for that spiritual guidance. For the project was based around relationships. So those relationships were relationships to the land, for example, relationships with All Nations Hope Network, community partners such as Buffalo People's Arts Institute. What was that relationship about? And the men who voluntarily asked to be a part of this project, why did they want to be a part of this? And what's that relationship and what's that commitment about? And last but not least, the elders. When we had an opportunity to approach the elders and walk alongside the elders, it was an exciting time to revisit this old ceremony and to find out just what we were going to learn about this. The intent going into this rites of passage will always reflect back to how are we going to be able to capture those ceremonies that teach us about self. So it's always coming back to what's your relationship with self, and going into that deep introspection and having those ceremonies in place so we can make that journey. And it's not an easy journey by far. Another piece of the intent was to build upon the capacities of what the community can provide in means of knowledge creation. And so most research asks a community for knowledge, and sometimes it doesn't always reciprocate back to the community, whereas this directly comes from the community and it stays within the community and the story is the community story. And it's not a story that fits within the academic journal box per se, or boundaries. And so that's nice. It's nice to be able to conduct research this way, and also build those critical conversations and those relationships with the elders and with the men and with the women of this project. And so, in terms of, again, intent, to learn more about how relations are conducted amongst the men and what the men have brought to the table was beautiful. There's a lot of humility within that circle. Going back to the campfire at the camp, for example, the camp was about 2.5 days. But when we were getting those the interviews transcribed, the individuals who were transcribing the interviews thought it was a week-long camp, and so that goes to show that the men had much to share. Their sacred stories were coming out. Their willingness to share their story was coming out, and so that spoke volumes of just how important the rites of passage can be to an individual's life. And again, the men that we worked with were a little older, and so this also was a factor of colonization that we had to address, and understanding that the rites of passage is not a common ceremony that one will find within all communities, but in small pockets they do occur. And when they do occur, that medicine transforms into beautiful sacred stories that communities can thrive on and continue thriving on. And having the ability to reach back to the past in order to be good in the present while moving forward into the future, the Rites of Passage ceremony has a beautiful opportunity to share again about self, whether you're the researcher and or participant. A ceremony is a ceremony. You only get out what you put in. And this is what the old ones share back to us of how to approach our intent, how to go by gauging how we choose to learn, and where do we choose to learn, and who do we choose to learn with, either through the two-legged, the four-legged, the ones that swim to the ones that fly, to the ones that crawl, to the seen and or unseen. And so when it comes to all our relations, they all can be our teachers. And so this is a little bit of segue into some of the nuances, some of the discussion that I couldn't share into the video. But following this video, I found something that I put a smile on my face, and to also capture one's intent behind the rites of passage ceremony. Aye, aye.